If you're going to frame an innocent man, you'd better make sure he isn't recording the entire performance. The first thing I noticed wasn't the flashing red and blue lights washing across my front porch. It was the smell of fresh spray paint drifting through the cool morning air, sharp enough to sting the back of my throat before I even unlocked the front door. Then came the voices. One officer calmly asked me to keep my hands where he could see them. Another was speaking with a woman whose confidence carried farther than the sirens ever could. Linda Crawford, president of our HOA, stood at the edge of my driveway wearing the kind of satisfied smile people wear when they believe the ending has already been written. A broken flower planter rested beside the walkway. Red paint streaked across my garage door. A heavy framing hammer lay on the concrete just a few feet from my welcome mat, as if someone had dropped it in a hurry. 3 neighbors stood together on the sidewalk whispering while pretending not to stare. I had lived in Willow Creek Estates for just under 4 months, long enough to recognize that silence spreads through a suburban neighborhood faster than gossip ever could. One officer glanced toward the hammer before looking back at me. "Sir, we've received reports of vandalism involving HOA property." Linda folded her arms without taking her eyes off me. "I warned everyone this would happen," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "He's been angry for weeks." I looked at the paint. I looked at the planter. I looked at the hammer. Then I looked up at the small decorative lantern hanging beside my front door. It looked exactly like every other light fixture on the block. Ordinary, forgettable, invisible. I almost smiled. Almost. Because hidden inside that lantern was one of 12 cameras quietly watching every inch of my property. They had been recording long before sunrise. Long before anyone called the police. Long before Linda decided this morning would become my nightmare. The officers didn't know that. My neighbors didn't know that. And judging by the confidence on Linda's face, neither did she. "Mr. Walker," another officer said politely, "can you explain what happened here?" I answered with the only truthful response that mattered. "Not yet." His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Not yet." I nodded. I'd rather everyone finishes telling their version first. Linda let out a short laugh, the kind that sounded rehearsed instead of genuine. "See," she said, pointing toward me. "He can't even deny it. Maybe I should have argued. Maybe I should have defended myself. Most people probably would have. But experience had taught me something far more valuable than winning arguments. People who believe they've already won rarely stop talking. They explain. They exaggerate. They fill every silence with details they never needed to volunteer. And every unnecessary word becomes another thread waiting to be pulled. As the morning breeze carried the scent of fresh paint across my yard, and another patrol vehicle rolled slowly onto the street, I slipped my phone into my pocket without unlocking it. Somewhere, hundreds of gigabytes of perfectly time-stamped footage were already waiting safely in cloud storage, untouched, unchanged, and completely invisible to everyone standing in front of my house. They thought they had built the perfect trap overnight. They had no idea they had spent the entire night walking through mine. 89 days earlier, the quietest sound in my new house was the soft hum of hard drives spinning inside a steel cabinet in the garage. Most people would have noticed the birds outside or the automatic sprinklers clicking on at exactly 6 o'clock every morning. I noticed systems. I always had. My name is Ethan Walker. I am 42 years old, and for nearly 2 decades I designed security systems for banks, courthouses, insurance companies, and businesses that could not afford to lose a single second of recorded evidence. Cameras were never about catching criminals to me. They were about protecting honest people from false stories. That lesson came with experience, not textbooks. After my divorce, I wanted something simple. No luxury neighborhood. No gated mansion. Just a modest 3-bedroom home where I could drink coffee on the back patio without hearing traffic every 5 minutes. Willow Creek Estates looked peaceful the day I signed the closing papers. Freshly cut grass filled the air. Children rode bicycles along clean sidewalks. American flags moved gently in the afternoon breeze. It looked like the kind of place where everyone waved and nobody locked their doors. I should have known appearances are often the cheapest thing a neighborhood can afford. During my first week, I noticed something that bothered me. The HOA president seemed to know exactly when people left for work, when deliveries arrived, and even when contractors stopped by. She always seemed to appear at exactly the right moment with another reminder about community standards. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was not. Either way, I trusted observations more than assumptions. Instead of arguing with anyone, I did what I had spent most of my career doing. I built a system. Every camera was selected for a purpose. Some watched wide angles across the driveway. Others focused on narrow paths leading toward the front door. One hid inside the porch lantern. Another sat behind a decorative attic vent. Two more blended into landscape lighting near the flower beds. None of them looked like cameras. That was intentional. Visible cameras change behavior. Invisible cameras reveal it. Every device had its own battery backup. Every recording streamed directly to encrypted cloud storage before saving locally. Even if someone disconnected the power, removed the equipment, or damaged the recorder itself, the footage would already exist somewhere they could never reach. Years earlier, one insurance investigation taught me never to trust a single point of failure. Since then, I never had. Friends teased me about turning an ordinary suburban house into what they jokingly called a miniature command center. I laughed along because they only knew about half of it. They saw the doorbell camera. They never saw the redundant network, the automatic time synchronization, or the hidden backup recorder quietly verifying every frame down to the second. Some people collect expensive watches or classic cars. I collected certainty. Looking back now, I realize I was not preparing for a break-in. I was preparing for something much harder to defend against. A lie that looked believable. Because locks can stop strangers, but only evidence can stop a carefully planned story once people decide they already know who the villain is. The first time I met Linda Crawford, she smiled before she spoke, but her eyes were already measuring me. She stood perfectly still on my front walkway, wearing an immaculate white polo embroidered with the Willow Creek Estates logo, holding a welcome packet in one hand and a clipboard in the other. The scent of expensive perfume drifted through the warm afternoon air, mixing with freshly cut grass and the faint smell of mulch from the flower beds lining every driveway on the street. She congratulated me on my new home, complimented the landscaping, and then spent the next 10 minutes explaining everything I was not allowed to do. Fence colors, trash can placement, approved mailbox finishes, holiday decoration deadlines, lawn height measured to the nearest inch. It sounded less like a neighborhood and more like an operating manual. I thanked her politely because I had learned years earlier that the fastest way to understand someone was to let them keep talking. Linda never seemed to run out of words. Within 2 weeks, she appeared whenever a delivery truck stopped at my house. She somehow noticed when I replaced an outdoor light fixture, even though it matched the original design exactly. She once walked across my lawn carrying a measuring tape because she believed one section of my hedges had grown beyond community standards. When I asked which section of the bylaws covered hedge height, her smile stiffened for less than a second before returning. She promised to email the regulation later. The email never came. That became her pattern. She expected compliance first and questions never. I preferred the opposite. Every notice she left on my door received the same response. I read the governing documents, highlighted the relevant section, and politely asked where the violation actually existed. I never raised my voice. I never insulted her. I simply requested the written rule. Somehow that frustrated her more than an argument ever could. Neighbors began stopping by while walking their dogs, quietly sharing stories they never wanted repeated. One family paid a fine because they were afraid of legal fees. Another repainted a perfectly acceptable front door after Linda insisted the shade of blue was unofficial, even though nobody could find such a restriction in the documents. An elderly widower admitted he signed maintenance agreements without reading them because he did not want conflict. Every conversation ended the same way. People lowered their voices before saying Linda's name, as if she could hear them from across the subdivision. Then I discovered something else. At the monthly board meeting, Linda casually mentioned that my property occupied one of the most strategically located lots in the neighborhood. She laughed while saying it, but everyone else at the table suddenly became very interested in their paperwork. I noticed the silence because silence usually hides information someone does not want discussed. On my drive home that evening, gravel crunched beneath my tires as I turned into my driveway, and I found myself looking at my house differently. It was no longer just the place where I lived. For reasons I did not yet understand, it had become something Linda wanted to control. The question was no longer whether she would make another move. The only question was how far she was willing to go before she believed nobody could stop her. Over the next 3 weeks, the pressure came in small, carefully measured doses. almost polite if you ignored the pattern hiding underneath. A violation notice appeared because my recycling bin had been visible from the street for 30 minutes after collection. Another claimed my garage door had remained open too long on a Saturday afternoon while I was organizing storage shelves. Then came a complaint about unauthorized contractor activity because a friend had helped me unload a new workbench from his pickup truck. Every notice arrived on official letterhead. Every accusation sounded serious until I compared it with the actual governing documents. Most of the rules either did not exist or had been stretched so far they barely resembled what was written. I answered each letter the same way, calmly, politely. I attached photographs, timestamps, and the exact section of the bylaws. I never accused anyone of bad faith. I simply asked for clarification. The responses became noticeably shorter. Linda stopped quoting regulations and started talking about community expectations instead. Expectations are difficult to challenge because they are never written down. One Thursday evening, I attended another board meeting. The clubhouse smelled of fresh coffee and lemon furniture polish, while folding chairs scraped softly across the hardwood floor. Linda spent nearly 20 minutes discussing neighborhood beautification projects before casually displaying a large architectural rendering mounted on an easel. The proposal showed an expanded clubhouse with additional parking, a fitness center, and a landscaped walking trail connecting several green spaces. People nodded with approval until I noticed something unusual. The trail curved directly behind my backyard. The new parking entrance occupied land immediately bordering my property. It was subtle enough that most residents never looked twice. I did. After the meeting ended, I walked closer to study the map. Linda stepped beside me with another practiced smile. She said the concept was only preliminary and nothing had been decided. Then she added something that stayed with me all the way home. She said cooperation from every homeowner would make the project much easier. Cooperation. Not approval. Not negotiation. Cooperation. The following afternoon, I visited the county property records office during my lunch break. Old paper carried that familiar dry scent every archive seems to share, and the clerk quietly pointed me towards subdivision filings dating back more than 20 years. After nearly 2 hours, I found exactly what I was looking for. My lot occupied the only remaining parcel preventing direct access between the existing clubhouse and the vacant land the association had recently purchased. Without my property, every expansion plan required an expensive redesign. With it, construction became simple. Suddenly, every warning letter, every inspection, and every unexpected visit made perfect sense. This had never been about trash bins or hedges. They wanted convenience, and I happened to own the one piece they could not simply vote into existence. Driving home beneath the golden light of late afternoon, I noticed a dark sport utility vehicle parked across from my house. It pulled away the moment I turned onto my street. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was not. I did not chase it. I simply checked my phone before walking inside. Every camera was online. Every timestamp matched perfectly. Every storage backup showed green. Whatever move came next, I wanted it documented from the very first second, because experience had taught me that the most dangerous plans usually begin long before anyone realizes the game has actually started. The morning everything changed began so quietly that it almost felt ordinary. A light fog hovered above the lawns as automatic sprinklers clicked from yard to yard, and the smell of damp grass drifted through the open kitchen window while I poured my first cup of coffee. My phone vibrated before the coffee had finished brewing. The notification came from my security dashboard. Motion detected near the side fence at 3:27 in the morning. That alone was not unusual. Deer occasionally wandered through the neighborhood, and delivery drivers sometimes turned around in nearby driveways before sunrise. Still, something about the alert caught my attention. I opened the recording while standing at the kitchen counter. A dark sport utility vehicle rolled slowly past my house without stopping. It disappeared around the corner, then returned less than 4 minutes later. This time it paused across the street for almost 2 full minutes before driving away again. The license plate was visible, but the windows were too dark to identify the occupants. I saved the clip without giving it much thought. By late afternoon, another surprise arrived. A certified letter from the HOA informed me that a special compliance review had been scheduled for my property the following week because of what they described as repeated community concerns. The wording was carefully chosen. There were no specific allegations. No dates and no names. Just vague language suggesting a growing problem. I read every line twice before placing the letter inside a folder where I had been keeping every notice, every email, and every photograph since moving into Willow Creek Estates. The folder was becoming thicker than I expected. 2 days later, I returned home from the hardware store with a few bags of garden supplies and immediately noticed something different. One section of my side gate was not fully closed. I always checked it before leaving because the latch had a habit of sticking during humid weather. I set the bags inside the garage and reviewed the camera footage before inspecting anything else. The recording showed a man wearing a reflective safety vest entering my yard through the unlocked gate shortly after noon. He walked directly toward the back fence, remained outside the camera's central view for several minutes, and then left carrying nothing. I did not recognize him. No service vehicle had been scheduled. No maintenance request had been approved. When I stepped into the backyard, everything looked normal until I reached the fence line. Fresh wooden survey stakes had been pushed into the ground at evenly spaced intervals, each marked with bright orange ribbon fluttering gently in the breeze. They had not been there that morning. I photographed every stake before touching nothing. Instead of pulling them out, I measured their locations, documented the time, and quietly called the county survey office. The representative politely informed me that no official survey had been requested for my address. That answer settled something in my mind. Someone wanted me to react. Someone expected frustration, confrontation, or a mistake they could point to later. I gave them none of those things. I simply added another folder to my evidence archive, backed up every new recording, and waited. People who build elaborate plans often become impatient when nothing goes according to schedule, and impatience has a way of revealing far more than careful planning ever intends. The compliance inspection arrived exactly when the certified letter promised it would. At 9 o'clock sharp, too. Members of the architectural committee walked up my driveway carrying clipboards while Linda followed several steps behind with the same calm confidence she always seemed to wear when she believed every detail had already been arranged. The morning sun reflected off freshly washed windows, and the smell of pine mulch lingered in the flower beds, as if the neighborhood itself wanted to appear flawless. One inspector politely introduced himself and explained that they needed to verify several reported violations. I stepped aside, invited them to conduct their inspection from all publicly accessible areas, and quietly reminded them that I preferred every communication to remain in writing. Linda smiled without saying a word. That silence told me more than any speech could have. They spent nearly 40 minutes walking around the property, measuring distances, taking photographs, and making notes on their clipboards. Every few minutes, Linda pointed toward another section of the yard, as though she was helping them discover something important. I simply watched. When they finally finished, the lead inspector thanked me for my cooperation and promised I would receive a formal report within a few business days. The report arrived the very next morning. It listed 6 alleged violations. 2 claimed unauthorized alterations to landscaping. 1 alleged improper storage of construction materials. Another questioned the placement of decorative lighting. The remaining 2 were so vague they could have described almost any house in the subdivision. I compared every statement with my own photographs, purchase receipts, property survey, and the governing documents. None of the allegations matched the evidence. Even more interesting, several inspection photographs attached to the report had been taken from angles that could only be reached by stepping several feet onto my property beyond the area visitors were normally permitted to access. That detail immediately caught my attention because one of my hidden cameras overlooked exactly that section of the yard. I opened the recording from the inspection and watched the entire visit from beginning to end. Nothing dramatic happened. No confrontation. No raised voices. Just careful movements, quiet conversations, and repeated moments when Linda guided attention toward places where nothing unusual actually existed. Then, just before everyone left, one committee member paused near the side fence while the others walked toward the driveway. He bent down for only a second before standing again and continuing after the group. It looked insignificant unless someone slowed the recording frame by frame. I did. The camera captured his hand placing a small white survey marker beside the fence before casually walking away. It matched none of the markers already documented on my property. I checked another camera from a different angle. The same action appeared even more clearly. Then I reviewed footage from earlier that morning. The marker had not been there before the inspection began. I leaned back in my chair and listened to the quiet hum of the recording server beside me. They were no longer looking for violations. They were creating reference points that had never existed before. I exported both video clips, preserved the original files with their digital timestamps, and stored duplicate copies in separate encrypted archives. Then I closed the folder without contacting anyone. Whatever they believed they were building, they had just added another piece of evidence for me instead. 3 days after the inspection report arrived, I received another certified envelope requesting my attendance at a special HOA compliance hearing. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock inside the clubhouse conference room. According to the letter, the board would review evidence of repeated violations and determine whether additional penalties or legal action were appropriate. The wording sounded formal, almost clinical, but between the lines I could read exactly what they expected. They wanted me to walk into that room angry. They wanted me to argue. They wanted an emotional reaction they could describe later as proof that I had become an unreasonable homeowner. Instead, I made a different appointment the very next morning. My attorney, Daniel Brooks, had spent nearly 30 years handling property disputes throughout the county. His office overlooked the courthouse square, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with stacks of legal files as I placed my evidence folders across the conference table. I expected him to focus immediately on the videos. He did not. Instead, he read every notice, every email, every inspection report, and every certified letter in chronological order without interrupting once. When he finally reached the end, he leaned back, folded his hands, and smiled. "You have something most clients never bring me," he said. "Patience." Then we reviewed the footage together. Every timestamp matched. Every camera angle confirmed the next one. The survey marker, the unexplained visitor, the inspection, the repeated notices. Individually, they looked unusual. Together, they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. I asked him if we should immediately send copies of everything to the HOA. He shook his head before I even finished the question. "Not yet," he replied. "Evidence has value. Timing gives it power." He explained that if we revealed the recordings too early, the board could simply withdraw the allegations, claim a misunderstanding, and quietly move on. If, however, they chose to formally present accusations after reviewing their own documents and making official statements, they would be committing themselves to a version of events that could later be compared directly against objective evidence. The difference was enormous. "Let them finish telling their story," Daniel said. "Do not interrupt them. Do not argue with them. Answer only the questions they ask. The more confident they become, the harder it will be for them to explain the recordings afterward." His advice matched the lesson I had learned years before while designing security systems. Cameras were never useful because they captured dramatic moments. They were valuable because they quietly preserved ordinary moments that people later tried to describe differently. During the days leading up to the hearing, more letters arrived, each one sounding increasingly certain that I had violated community standards. I responded exactly as before, thanking the board for the information and confirming that I would attend the meeting. Nothing more. Every evening, I reviewed the archived footage, verified the digital hashes of the original files, and copied encrypted backups to separate storage locations. By the time Tuesday finally arrived, I was carrying only a slim folder into the clubhouse. The real evidence was nowhere in my hands. It was already secured in multiple places, waiting for exactly the right moment. Linda greeted residents with the relaxed confidence of someone expecting a routine victory. She smiled as I entered the room. I smiled back, knowing that the most important part of the evening had not even begun. The clubhouse conference room felt unusually warm that evening despite the steady hum of the air conditioning above us. Coffee brewed somewhere near the back counter, filling the room with a familiar smell that contrasted sharply with the tension settling over every chair around the long table. Linda opened the meeting with practiced confidence, thanking everyone for attending before explaining that the board had a responsibility to preserve community standards. She spoke slowly, carefully, making frequent references to fairness and accountability. Then one by one, the documents appeared. Inspection reports, printed photographs, violation notices. Every page was arranged neatly inside matching presentation folders. She described each allegation as though there could be no possible disagreement. Another board member confirmed the findings. A committee volunteer explained how the survey marker had supposedly identified an existing landscaping violation. Every statement sounded polished because they had clearly rehearsed together beforehand. Daniel remained completely silent beside me, occasionally writing a short note on a yellow legal pad without once interrupting the presentation. I followed his advice exactly. I answered every direct question with short, respectful responses and never volunteered additional information. As the meeting continued, the confidence around the room became almost visible. Several neighbors quietly nodded along while others looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Linda eventually folded her hands and looked directly at me. "Mr. Walker," she said, "after everything the board has documented, do you have anything you would like to say before we vote?" The room became so quiet I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock behind the president's chair. I looked toward Daniel. He gave a barely noticeable nod. That was the first time he spoke all evening. "Madam President," he said calmly, "before the board proceeds, my client would like the official record to reflect that every statement presented tonight has been made voluntarily and accurately to the best of each speaker's knowledge." Linda answered immediately, "Of course." Another board member agreed. The secretary confirmed that the meeting minutes were being recorded. Daniel thanked them politely before placing a small laptop on the conference table. There was no dramatic announcement, no raised voice. He simply connected a cable to the large television mounted on the wall. The screen remained black for a moment before displaying a digital timestamp from the morning of the inspection. The first video showed the side yard exactly as it appeared before anyone arrived. No survey marker, no violation. The recording continued uninterrupted as the inspection team entered the property. Everyone watched quietly while the committee completed its measurements. Then the camera angle shifted to another recording taken from the opposite side of the fence. The image clearly showed one committee member pausing, looking over his shoulder, and placing the white survey marker into the ground before casually walking away. Nobody in the room spoke. Daniel advanced to the next synchronized camera angle, then another, each carrying the identical timestamp from separate positions around the property. Every recording confirmed the same sequence from a different perspective. Linda's expression changed for the first time since the meeting began. She looked toward the committee member, who stared silently at the table without saying a word. Daniel did not accuse anyone of anything. He simply allowed the recordings to continue playing exactly as they had been captured, second by second, leaving the room to compare objective evidence against every confident statement that had filled the meeting only minutes before. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The only sound inside the clubhouse was the quiet hum of the television as the final frame of the recording remained frozen on the screen. The digital timestamp glowed in the corner, unchanged and impossible to argue with. Linda slowly cleared her throat as though searching for words that refused to come. One board member removed his reading glasses and stared at the table. Another quietly closed the presentation folder that had seemed so convincing only minutes earlier. Daniel calmly disconnected the laptop, folded the cable, and placed everything back into his briefcase without the slightest hint of celebration. He understood something I had learned years before. Facts do not need applause. They only need to exist. The board attorney, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke. He requested a short recess so the association could review the newly presented evidence. Nobody objected. Residents stepped into the hallway speaking in hushed voices while the board remained behind closed doors. I stood outside near the entrance, where the cool evening air carried the familiar scent of freshly watered lawns. For the first time since moving into Willow Creek Estates, several neighbors approached me without lowering their voices. One quietly admitted she had received violation notices that never seemed to make sense. Another said he had always been afraid to question decisions because he assumed the board already knew more than everyone else. They were not looking for drama. They were looking for reassurance that fairness still mattered. About 30 minutes later, the board reconvened. The atmosphere inside the room had completely changed. The confidence that filled the meeting earlier had disappeared, replaced by careful, measured language. The board attorney announced that the compliance proceedings against me were being withdrawn immediately pending an independent review of the inspection process and related documentation. All outstanding violation notices connected to the hearing were suspended. The proposed vote never happened. No one looked in my direction when those words were read into the record. Linda offered a brief statement acknowledging that additional review would be appropriate before taking further action. It was the first time I had ever heard uncertainty in her voice. During the weeks that followed, several homeowners requested access to association records. Board procedures were reviewed, and outside advisors were invited to evaluate compliance practices. Conversations around the neighborhood slowly changed. Instead of whispering about who had received another violation letter, people started asking where the written rule actually appeared. Questions replaced assumptions. Documentation replaced rumors. As for me, life became surprisingly ordinary again. Saturday mornings returned to coffee on the back patio. The automatic sprinklers clicked across the lawns exactly as they always had. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks while neighbors waved without hesitation. The porch lantern still hung beside my front door, looking no different from the day I installed it. Visitors saw an ordinary light fixture. I knew better. Hidden behind that piece of glass was a quiet reminder that preparation is often invisible until the exact moment it becomes necessary. Looking back, I never defeated anyone through louder arguments or sharper words. I simply refused to replace evidence with emotion. People can question opinions. They can misunderstand intentions. They can even rewrite conversations. But a carefully preserved record speaks with the same calm voice every single time it is played. Justice is not always immediate, and it is rarely dramatic. Sometimes it waits patiently inside a timestamp, a forgotten camera, and the simple decision to let the truth finish recording before anyone rushes to tell the story.